They thought I was just the nanny, silent, obedient, invisible. But I was teaching their children the one truth they could never buy, who really deserved their love. Before you hear my story, tap subscribe and drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated, discarded like you didn't matter. I arrived at the Carter's house on a gray morning that smelled of rain. The kind of morning where the clouds hang low, pressing down on you, reminding you of your place in the world. The taxi driver looked at the mansion, whistled low and said, "Nice place. Bet they pay well." I didn't answer. I didn't want to explain that it wasn't pay that had brought me here. It was desperation. Rent was overdue, my father's medical bills were still sitting in a stack back home, and the job market had shut its doors to someone like me. A live-in nanny position wasn't what I had dreamed of when I earned my teaching degree. But dreams don't pay bills. The Carter's house loomed before me like something out of a magazine. Marble steps. Iron gates. Windows tall enough to make you feel small. I took a breath, adjusted the strap of my worn suitcase, and rang the bell. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Carter. She was beautiful in the way statues are beautiful. Flawless, polished, and cold. Her eyes skimmed me from head to toe, not lingering long enough to see me, just long enough to measure me. "You'll find the staff quarters at the back," she said without a greeting. Her voice was smooth, practiced, like she had said these lines before. "Tiny, but you won't need much. We expect discretion, punctuality, and obedience." Obedience. The word stung, though I forced a polite nod. She turned on her heel, expecting me to follow. As I stepped inside, I caught sight of the polished floors, the sterile white walls, the chandelier that glittered above like a crown I'd never touch. It was beautiful, yes, but there was no warmth. No photos of messy childhood smiles. No drawings stuck to the refrigerator. Only order. Only control. Mr. Carter was waiting in the living room, seated on a leather armchair like it was a throne. He didn't stand when I entered. He simply extended his hand. His grip was firm, businesslike, as though we were signing a contract. "The children are spirited," he said, his mouth curving just slightly, though not in a smile. "Keep them in line. No sugar, no nonsense. And remember, don't interfere in family matters." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. I swallowed. "Yes, sir." He released my hand, already dismissing me as he turned back to the stack of papers on his desk. The staff quarters turned out to be a cramped attic room with slanted ceilings and a single narrow bed. The window overlooked the back garden, which looked as if no child had ever played there. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, and tried not to feel the weight of disappointment pressing down. But then, I heard laughter. I stepped out into the hallway and saw them. Emma, age 6, with a cascade of blonde curls and a gap-toothed grin, and Jacob, age 4, clutching a stuffed bear nearly as big as he was. They were chasing each other around the banister, giggling until Mrs. Carter's sharp voice cut through the air like a whip. "Emma! Jacob! Stop that this instant! You'll ruin your clothes!" The laughter vanished, like someone had snuffed out a candle. Their small faces dropped as they scurried past me, suddenly solemn, eyes lowered. It was in that instant I knew. The Carters had built a palace of rules, but not a home. The first dinner was a revelation. I stood at the edge of the dining room, as instructed, waiting to refill glasses or fetch whatever Mrs. Carter snapped for. The table gleamed under the chandelier, plates arranged like paintings. "Emma," Mrs. Carter said sweetly, though her eyes were sharp, "your handwriting today was dreadful. Do you want people to think you're careless?" Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She lowered her eyes. "No, Mother." "And Jacob," Mr. Carter said, his voice deeper, heavier. "Crying when you fell this afternoon? You're a boy. Boys don't cry." Jacob's small shoulders hunched. "Yes, Father." I felt it then, that ember of anger deep in my chest. But I kept my face still, my posture obedient. I was the help. Invisible. When Jacob's eyes flicked toward me, wide and desperate, I offered the smallest smile I dared. A secret smile. The kind you give when you can't say the words. "You're fine just as you are." It was enough. His little shoulders eased just slightly. Behind closed doors, their disdain for me was open. "You walk too loud. You read too much, it looks lazy. You're not here to be their friend." I swallowed every insult, every correction. Because leaving wasn't an option. But at night, when the house quieted and the Carters retreated to their separate silences, I heard the soft padding of small feet on the stairs. "Miss Anna?" Emma's whisper. Tentative. "Can we stay with you?" Jacob's voice. Hopeful. And there, in my tiny attic room, we created our own world. I read them stories in hushed tones, Emma curled against one arm, Jacob clutching his bear against the other. They asked questions, about dragons, about courage, about why bad things happened, and I answered as honestly as I could. We laughed quietly, muffling our giggles in the blanket. And when they finally drifted off, their breathing steady and safe, I would sit awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, promising myself that whatever else happened, I would protect this. I didn't realize then that the promise was the seed of my revenge. The Carters' fight started as whispers, sharp words carried down the hall. Then came slammed doors, nights when Emma cried into my lap, Jacob insisting he was fine while his little body shook. The divorce arrived like a storm, sudden and violent. Lawyers, shouting matches, papers flung across tables. And then, almost laughably, they both turned to me. "Stay," Mrs. Carter demanded, mascara streaking her cheeks. "For stability. For appearances." "Stay," Mr. Carter ordered, jaw clenched, eyes bloodshot. "For the kids. You know them better than anyone." I looked at their perfect, crumbling lives. And I stayed. Not for them. For the children. Always the children. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that staying wasn't submission. It was the beginning. The ember inside me glowed brighter. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel. It would be patient. Silent. I would take from them the only thing they valued, without ever raising my voice. Their children's hearts. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of commands and silence. Mrs. Carter had a way of making me feel like part of the furniture. Useful when needed, invisible otherwise. "Anna, the silverware's crooked. Fix it. Anna, you're standing too close. The guests will notice. Anna, don't let them think you're anything more than the help." Each word was dipped in disdain, as though speaking my name left a bad taste in her mouth. Mr. Carter wasn't much better. He didn't insult directly. He dismissed. When I tried to update him about the children's progress at school, he'd wave a hand without looking up from his phone. "Handle it. That's what you're here for." But the children, they saw me. One rainy afternoon, I picked Emma and Jacob up from school. Mrs. Carter hadn't shown up, something about a can't-miss charity brunch. Emma trudged beside me, her hair plastered with rain. Mommy said she'd come this time. I crouched to meet her eyes. "I know, sweetheart. But I'm here. And I always will be." Her little hand slipped into mine. Jacob, trailing behind, asked softly, "Do you promise?" "I promise," I whispered. That night, when Mrs. Carter finally swept through the door in her silk dress and diamond earrings, the children didn't run to greet her. They stayed curled beside me on the couch, still in their damp socks, listening as I read aloud. Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed. "They should be in bed." "They wanted to wait up for you," I said gently. She glanced at them, then at me. Her lips tightened. "Don't encourage bad habits, Anna." She didn't notice the way Emma's fingers tightened around mine, or the silent look Jacob gave me. "Don't leave us." The Carters liked to entertain. Dinners with colleagues, weekend brunches, fundraisers. And every time, I was reminded of my place. "Stay out of sight," Mrs. Carter would hiss. "If someone asks, your staff, nothing more." So I lingered in the kitchen, carrying trays back and forth, watching guests smile politely while Mrs. Carter recounted her latest fashion purchases or Mr. Carter bragged about his business deals. But occasionally, a guest would notice. "Are these your children?" one woman asked once, as Jacob clung to my leg. Mrs. Carter laughed too quickly. No. That's the nanny. They just get attached. You know how children are." The woman smiled. "Well, they clearly adore her." Mrs. Carter's face stiffened. That night, she cornered me in the hallway. "Don't get ideas, Anna. Affection is not authority. Remember your place." I nodded, outwardly meek. Inwardly, I thought, if affection isn't authority, why does it bother you so much? The fights began as whispers behind closed doors. Late-night arguments muffled through the walls. Mr. Carter's low growl. Mrs. Carter's shrill retorts. Doors slammed. Glass shattered. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Emma's eyes were wide in the dim light, her hands trembling. "Miss Anna," she whispered. "They're fighting again." I opened my blanket, and she crawled in without hesitation. Moments later, Jacob followed, clutching his bear. We huddled together, their small bodies pressed against mine, as the voices downstairs rose and fell like waves crashing against a cliff. "Will they stop?" Jacob asked softly. "Yes," I lied, stroking his hair. "They always do." But even as I whispered the words, I knew the truth. Things were breaking. The breaking point came one Sunday morning. Mr. Carter had stormed out after another argument, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. Mrs. Carter sat in the living room, mascara smudged, clutching a glass of wine though it was barely noon. The children hovered in the hallway, uncertain, afraid. "Go," she snapped when she saw me. "Take them somewhere. Anywhere. I don't care." So I did. We spent the afternoon in the park, the three of us lying on the grass, watching clouds drift overhead. Emma pointed at one that looked like a dragon. Jacob said another looked like a castle. And I realized then, they weren't afraid with me. Not here. Not in this little world we were creating together. When we came home, Mrs. Carter didn't ask where we'd gone. She didn't even look up. But the children did. Jacob whispered before bed, "I like it when you take care of us." Emma added, "Promise you won't ever leave?" I kissed their foreheads. "I promise." The divorce papers came 2 months later. The house filled with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Meetings with lawyers. Shouts in the kitchen. Phone calls that ended in slammed receivers. The children clung tighter to me than ever. Emma refused to sleep in her own bed. Jacob cried silently at night, trying to be brave. And then, almost laughably, the Carters both turned to me. Mrs. Carter's eyes were red-rimmed. "Stay. For stability. For appearances." Mr. Carter's jaw clenched. "Stay. For the kids. You know them better than anyone." I stood there, their voices echoing in the grand, cold house, and realized something. 4 years I had obeyed. Stayed invisible. Endured their mockery. But now they needed me. I looked at their desperate faces and gave a quiet nod. "I'll stay," I said. "But not for them. Never for them. For the children. For the promise I had made in the dark." And as I tucked Emma and Jacob into bed that night, listening to their steady breathing, the ember inside me glowed hotter. They thought I was obedient. They thought I was harmless. But they had no idea. Because my revenge had already begun. It was late one evening, a week after the divorce papers were signed, when the moment revealed itself. The house was too quiet. Mrs. Carter had gone out for an important dinner, and Mr. Carter hadn't shown up for his scheduled visitation. The children and I sat at the kitchen table, the only light a soft glow from the overhead lamp. Emma pushed her peas around her plate. Jacob stared at his milk like it might hold an answer. Finally, Emma whispered, "Why don't they want to be here?" The question struck deeper than I expected. My first instinct was to shield them, to give some polished reassurance. But when I looked at their small, searching faces, I couldn't. They deserved more than lies. I set down my fork and leaned in. It isn't that they don't want to be here. Sometimes grown-ups, they get so caught up in fighting with each other that they forget what matters most. Jacob frowned. "Us." "Yes," I said softly. "You. Always you." For a long moment, the silence hung heavy between us. Then Emma slipped her hand into mine, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You always remember." Jacob climbed onto my lap, clutching his bear, and whispered against my shoulder, "Promise you'll never forget." I held them both, my heart thundering in my chest. "I promise," I whispered. And I meant it. In that instant I knew the truth. The Carters had money. They had status. They had the house, the cars, the glittering parties. But I had something they didn't even realize was slipping away. Their children's trust. Their children's love. Their children's hearts. And once given, those couldn't be bought back. As I tucked them into bed that night, their hands still clutching mine until the very last second, I felt the ember inside me ignite into something steadier. My revenge wouldn't be in shouting matches or courtroom battles. It wouldn't be in tearing down their wealth or mocking their failures. It would be in this. The slow, patient claiming of what they valued least until it was the only thing that mattered. They thought I was obedient, invisible, forgettable. But one day, when their children no longer turned to them for comfort, when their names no longer carried the weight they once did, they would realize what they had lost. And by then, it would be far too late. I closed the door softly behind me, the house silent except for their gentle breathing, and allowed myself the smallest, quietest smile. The silent servant, they had called me. But I wasn't serving anymore. I was winning. The years after the divorce passed like a slow-burning candle. On the surface, not much changed. I still woke up before sunrise, patting down the cold marble stairs to prepare breakfast, still tied Emma's braids with ribbons that never seemed to match her mother's approval, still packed Jacob's backpack with neatly folded worksheets he'd likely get scolded for forgetting. But inside the house, the foundation had cracked. The Carters' voices no longer rose together in brittle mockery. They came separately now. One week Mrs. Carter, perfectly dressed even at 7 a.m., her perfume sharp enough to sting my nose. The next week Mr. Carter, sleeves rolled up, barking orders like I was one of his employees. I had become the constant. The one stable note in a home built on shifting keys. At first, I told myself I was just surviving, keeping my head down. But deep inside, a quiet ember was taking root. The kind of ember that doesn't flare, not yet, but waits patient, certain of its eventual blaze. Mrs. Carter began spending longer hours at galas and charity luncheons, parading herself as the dignified divorcee. She would sweep into the house late at night, heels clicking across the marble, eyes sharp as she glanced at the untouched piano or the missing wine bottle. "Children asleep already?" she'd ask, though she never tried to peek in on them herself. "Yes," I would answer softly, careful not to betray the warmth still lingering from our bedtime stories, the laughter we had tucked beneath blankets. She would sigh, pour herself a glass of wine and mutter, "At least you're useful." Mr. Carter wasn't much different. He had taken a new apartment, sleek and modern, and brought the children there on his weeks. But his temper was shorter now, his words cutting. "You're coddling him," he once snapped when Jacob admitted he was afraid to sleep alone. "He's 8, I replied gently before catching myself. His eyes hardened. "You forget your place, Anna. Don't undermine me." I bit my tongue, nodding obediently. But that night, I sat on the edge of Jacob's bed until he drifted off, whispering, "You're safe. Don't let anyone tell you fear makes you weak." His small hand clutched mine like a lifeline. And in that moment, the ember glowed brighter. Time taught me the art of quiet rebellion. I couldn't protect the children from every sharp word their parents hurled, but I could build something stronger inside them. Something their parents could never touch. When Mrs. Carter mocked Emma's drawings, "You'll never get into college doodling flowers," I bought her a sketchbook and told her about Frida Kahlo. When Mr. Carter scolded Jacob for wasting time reading, I handed him a copy of The Hobbit and whispered, "The bravest journeys begin with turning a page." I taught them to say please and thank you when their parents rarely did. I taught them that kindness wasn't weakness, that love wasn't bargaining, that truth didn't need to scream to be heard. And slowly they changed. Emma's eyes, once downcast, began to shine when she showed me essays full of sharp opinions. Jacob's laughter, hesitant at first, grew bold, echoing down hallways too used to silence. The Carters didn't notice. They were too busy keeping score with each other. But I noticed. The first sign that the balance had shifted came on Emma's 12th birthday. Mrs. Carter had thrown a party dripping in glitter and hired performers to impress the other wealthy parents. But when Emma cut the cake, she turned, not to her mother, but to me. "Miss Anna," she whispered, holding out the first slice. The room went still for a heartbeat. Mrs. Carter's smile faltered. I felt her gaze like a blade. Later, she cornered me in the kitchen, her voice venom-sweet. "Don't overstep. You're the help. Remember that." I smiled politely, as though her words hadn't landed. But inside, I thought, it isn't me overstepping. It's you falling behind. By the time Emma entered high school, the Carters' attempts at parenting had dwindled to performance. They wanted photos for social media, grades to brag about, trophies to polish. But when Emma broke down over her first heartbreak, she didn't run to them. She slipped into my attic room at midnight, tears soaking my shoulder. "He said I wasn't enough," she choked. I stroked her hair. "Then he's blind." People who can't see your worth don't deserve your heart. She cried herself to sleep there, while Mrs. Carter slept soundly in her king-sized bed below. And when Jacob got into a fight defending a smaller boy from bullies, Mr. Carter shouted that he had embarrassed the family. That night, Jacob came to me, fists trembling. Was I wrong? No, I said firmly. You were brave. And bravery is never wrong. The night I truly understood the depth of their trust was Emma's high school graduation. The Carters stood stiff and perfect for the photos, each gripping one of Emma's arms like she was a trophy they'd both won. But when the ceremony ended, Emma slipped free and ran straight into my arms. You were right, she whispered fiercely. I did it. And Jacob, taller now, joined us, wrapping me in a hug that nearly knocked me off balance. Somewhere behind us, Mrs. Carter called sharply, Emma! Jacob! But they didn't turn back. That evening, I opened my phone and froze. On Emma's page, a photo. The three of us, arms tangled, smiling in a way I hadn't realized we could. The caption read, Our true north. The one person who never left. The comments poured in, classmates, teachers, even strangers praising the bond they saw. Mrs. Carter saw it too. Her call came within the hour. You've poisoned them against me, she hissed. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. No. You did that yourself. Her silence on the other end was sharp enough to cut. Then came the scream, high and furious. You'll regret this, Anna. You think you've won, but you're nothing. Nothing. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the dark screen, my heart pounding. But all I felt was peace. Because the ember I had carried for years had finally become a flame. And it was only just beginning to burn. The air smelled of autumn leaves and new beginnings. We stood in the courtyard of Jacob's University, students swarming around us with boxes, duffel bags, and dreams too big to fit inside a dorm room. Jacob hugged me tighter than he had in years, his grown man's frame overwhelming the small woman I still was. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the strength of his arms, but because of the swell in my chest. Don't cry, Miss Anna, he murmured against my shoulder. I'll call every week. I promise. I laughed softly, though my throat ached. I'll hold you to that. A camera clicked. Mrs. Carter stood a few feet away, perfectly dressed as always, her smile brittle, her eyes glassy. She tried to pull Jacob toward her for one last photo, but he didn't move until I did. She forced a laugh, too loud, too sharp. Jacob, darling, stand closer. He obliged, but only after I stepped into the frame. And when he smiled for the picture, it wasn't at her. It was at me. That night, I returned to my quiet attic room, the space that had once felt like a cage but now felt like a throne. On the narrow bed lay an envelope, the handwriting uneven but familiar. My heart stuttered as I opened it. Miss Anna, you were more of a mother than she ever was. Don't ever forget that. Love, Jacob. Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest, my body trembling, not with sorrow but with triumph. Because this was it. This was the moment. The Carters had always believed that money was power, that image was everything, that control could be bought. But tonight, with this letter in my hand, I knew the truth. They had lost the only currency that mattered. And they would never get it back. Thanksgiving came a month later. Mrs. Carter had invited Emma and Jacob to her house, promising a catered feast and important guests. Mr. Carter had sent messages about a ski trip, dangling expensive promises. They both waited. But Emma and Jacob came home, to me. They laughed in my little kitchen, feet tucked under them on mismatched chairs, Emma chopping vegetables while Jacob set the table. The turkey was too small, the gravy a little too salty, the pumpkin pie slightly burnt. But it was ours. Emma raised her glass of sparkling cider, her smile radiant. To the woman who raised us, she said. Jacob's voice was steady. To our true north. My hands shook as I lifted my glass. Across the table, their eyes shone with the love their parents had never earned. The phone rang 3 times that night. Mrs. Carter. Jacob glanced at the screen, then turned it face down. I'll call her tomorrow, he said quietly without guilt. Mr. Carter sent a delivery the next morning. Expensive gifts, wrapped in glossy paper. Emma looked at the boxes, then at me. Do you want them? She asked. I shook my head. She smiled, and we returned them unopened. My revenge wasn't fire and fury. It was quieter. Sharper. The kind that cuts so deep it doesn't bleed until long after the blade has been removed. The Carters had mocked me, belittled me, dismissed me. But in the end, I had taken the one thing they could never replace. Not through lies. Not through manipulation. But through love stronger than their neglect, patience sharper than their cruelty. As I watched Emma and Jacob laughing in the glow of candlelight that Thanksgiving night, I understood. They had money. They had status. They had everything. Except the only thing that mattered. Their children's hearts. And that was mine. Forever. It happened 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. Mrs. Carter showed up at the house unannounced, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. She didn't knock. She never had. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes from Emma's late-night snack, when I heard her voice echo down the hall. Anna, where are my children? I dried my hands slowly, taking my time. When I stepped into the living room, she was standing there, immaculate as always, but her eyes wild. They don't answer my calls, she hissed. They barely text. Jacob ignored my invitation for Christmas. Do you think I don't see what you're doing? I met her gaze calmly. I don't have to do anything, Mrs. Carter. They make their own choices now. Her face flushed, anger twisting her perfect features. You poisoned them. Turned them against me. You're nothing but a servant. I tilted my head slightly. A servant doesn't get letters calling her a mother. A servant doesn't host Thanksgiving while the real mother dines alone. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth but no sound came. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You had money. You had beauty. You had status. But you never had their hearts. That's not something you can buy. That's something you earn. She shook her head violently. They're mine. They're my children. They were, I said softly. Until you forgot what that meant. Silence hung between us, heavy as stone. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Not of me but of the truth. From upstairs, laughter drifted down. Emma and Jacob, playing a board game in the attic, the same room they had once crept into on stormy nights. The sound sliced through the tension, sharp and undeniable. Mrs. Carter's eyes darted upward. Her lips parted, as if she might call their names, but no words came. She knew. Even if they came down, even if they stood here, they would stand beside me. Not her. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. Without another word, she turned on her heel and left, the slam of the door reverberating through the house. I stood there for a long moment, the silence thick around me, until Jacob's voice called from upstairs. Miss Anna? Are you coming? I smiled, letting the quiet satisfaction wash over me. Yes, I called back. I'm coming. As I climbed the stairs to join them, I realized the revenge was complete. Not loud. Not cruel. But absolute. Because in the end, she had money. She had beauty. She had status. But I had something she would never reclaim. Her children's hearts. And that was all I ever needed. Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it simply waits, until the silence is louder than any cry. If you've ever bided your time in silence, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, stay patient. Stay unbreakable.